the switch sheet arrangement from the third type of clause, I send a message to you. Conceals the relationship between the indirect object, you, and the direct object, a message, mediated by the preposition to. Then it gets obvious that the definition of the transitive verb send implies the hidden relationship between the indirect object and the direct object. There is a time gap between the moment when the direct object receives the definition of the transitive verb sent from the speaker. And the moment the speaker as the subject actualizes the definition of the transitive verb sent. The assumed existence of the indirect object, you, that the direct object, a message orient, is actualized to exist after the indirect object gets the definition of the transitive verb send. The third clause is this. I ask you a favor. The speaker states the clause to focus on the entire course that the speaker as the subject conveys the condition indicated by the transitive verb. Ask. From the speaker to the indirect object you passed through the direct object of favor. There is the first example, he gives her water. The speaker states the clause to focus on the entire course that the action indicated by the transitive verb gives is conveyed from the subject he to the indirect object her, passed through the direct object water. There is a conference. The second transitivity of a transitive verb by the definition. The clause stated in the first type can be stated in the passive voice of the speaker from the perspective of the indirect object. That is the final destination of the entire transition. This clause, he gives her water, is stated again from the perspective of the indirect object, she, that receives the definition of the transitive verb sent from the speaker as the subject and the direct object, both. She is given is about the condition of the subject, she, who exists at first. And the past participle given with the trait of an adjective describes the subject as a subjective complement. Then the direct object stated right after the past participle given. In the previous clause, the subject, who is a male, out of the conversation, starts and give the definition of the transitive verb give to a female out of the conversation via water as the direct object. So even though the perspective to state the clause has changed, but the deliverance stays in the same. So we can understand that the transitive verb give, the definition of the transitive verb give is delivered to the object water as it is in the previous clause. In this clause as well. So we can say that water receives the definition of the transitive verb give. In this moment, we can find the second transitivity of the past participle given. The past participle given is applied as a subjective complement in this clause. And water receives the definition of the transitive verb give. So we can say that the object, water, is the object of the subjective complement. The past participle given is a transformed word from a transitive verb give to practice the role of the subjective complement that describes the subject of the clause she with the trait of the adjective. In the passive voice, the past participle given is applied as an adjective because the way to state a clause in the passive voice of the speaker is irreplaceable. The subject of the clause she is the indirect object to get the action indicated by the transitive verb give at last. As the final destination. The reason why the transitive verb give is transformed into the past participle given is to reveal the first transitivity of the transitive verb give. So the form of the past participle given reveals the fact that the subject of the clause she is the indirect object of the transitive verb give, according to the previous clause. He gives her water. The object water of the past participle given to practice the role as the subjective complement remains in the relationship to get the action indicated by the transitive verb give from the subject who is a male as a non-participant in the conversation. The direct object water in the clause stated in the second type of clause with the passive voice practices the role as the object of the subjective complement given to receive the definition of the transitive verb give.